Ghostly terrors and spooky shenanigans abound in Dreadout 2. It's set directly after the events of the first game, as our hero Linda finds herself trying to go back to some semblance of normal life. But the events that transpired aren't just going to sink into the background. After some students, who blame Linda for the deaths of their classmates and teacher, perform a dark ritual as a practical joke, Linda is thrown back into a supernatural nightmare that just might be the past reaching into the future. It seems once paranormal forces know you exist, there's no escaping the darkness. Dreadout 2 is a survival horror adventure set in Indonesia, and, as such, draws its inspirations from that country's urban legends and myths. Ghosts and guardians, monsters and ghouls, and a plethora of urban legends are yours to discover, puzzle through, and hopefully survive. The gameplay seems inspired by many titans of the genre, part Silent Hill, part Outlast or Amnesia, and a whole heap of Fatal Frame, or Project Zero depending on your region. It takes their most prominent mechanics and manages to make them its own. Many of the core mechanics from the first game return, but the developers have included a few new elements to expand and bulk up the gameplay. That core loop still revolves around investigating and surviving spooky environments using Linda's trusty smartphone. She has the ability to see ghostly spectres around her through the camera lens, and, as with Fatal Frame, she can stun enemies using the flash and damage them using charged up photos. New to the sequel, though only during specific encounters, is Linda's ability to fight back using melee weapons. You can go in swinging, but if you stun them with the camera first, you can trigger a high damage finisher. To add some variety, the developers change up what you do in specific encounters. In some your phone is useless, in others you have to fight back, while in a few you have to use the environment to hide and sneak past enemies. It goes a long way towards keeping the gameplay loop reasonably fresh and interesting, as you're not entirely sure what to expect next. As in Silent Hill, Linda can flip between two versions of the world, the normal one and a spooky, gore and corpse-filled one. This only happens at specific intervals in the story, usually where that otherworld element adds a layer of creepiness to the environment, but it's a mechanic that's not used as much as it could have been. It's a nice one nonetheless, adding that creepiness factor to a few narrative beats, such as when a blood-splattered Linda steps through a door in the otherworld, only to find herself in a full classroom in the real one. The final new addition is a small hub area for you to explore and pick up simple side quests that range from hunting down urban legends to joining a ghost hunting tour group. Now visually, Dreadout 2 is certainly one of the better uses of Unreal Engine 4 on the Nintendo Switch, at least where the environments and performance are concerned. Most of the game's architecture looks fantastic and the game actually runs quite well. There is dynamic resolution in play though, so you'll see resolution drops in more complex areas, such as that aforementioned hub. Character models are, for the most part, well done, specifically for Linda and the ghosts. Unfortunately, most NPCs tend to suffer from lower polygon models and textures, and, in contrast to the other versions, you have to accept some obvious asset downgrades to bring the game across to the Switch. Unfortunately, Dreadout 2 does have more glaring issues that highlight its lower budget indie status. There's a level of jank to the controls and animations, which can be both immersion-breaking and sometimes a little frustrating when being chased. Certain art assets and locations have also clearly received less attention to them. The examples of the control issues include how, despite there being a dedicated run button, Linda moves far too slowly for my taste, a big issue in combat when later bosses are much faster than you. This is compounded by the lack of a dodge button, which makes combat more frustrating than it needs to be. You see, stun locking is a big mechanic that can work both for and against the player, and some bosses can trigger a combination of stun lock animations you can't break out of until you die. Now that said, apart from a late boss and one stealth sequence, Dreadout 2 is very much on the easy side. Linda can take a ton of damage, and it was very rare that I felt the need to be afraid of the various ghouls on my tail. The use of music and atmosphere manages to create a compelling and spooky environment, but the game itself isn't particularly scary. Now that might be a deal breaker if you're looking for a high dose of horror in your games, but for me it didn't stop Dreadout 2 from being a fun enough and engaging experience. So even with its flaws and the occasional presentation issues, Dreadout 2 is a mostly good-looking and fun game to pick up on the Nintendo Switch. There are enough mechanical changes to keep the sequel fresh through its brisk runtime, while the Indonesian myths and urban legends add some serious and fresh flavour to the phantasmagorical proceedings. It may not be scary or overtly challenging, but it was a delightfully entertaining romp all the same.
If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow.